In a quiet suburban home, a recovering psychiatric patient was about to discover the most devastating betrayal of her life. What started as a simple homecoming took a shocking turn when she opened the door to her childhood bedroom. Chen wasn't your typical mental health survivor. For 6 months, she had spent her life rebuilding her mind at Hillcrest Psychiatric Facility, known for her determination to heal from the trauma that had shattered her world. When she encountered the fully equipped nursery where her bedroom used to be, she had no idea she was walking into a web of family deception that would challenge everything she believed about love, loyalty, and consent. Maya's desperate search for answers would lead to the discovery that she was a mother to a child she never knew existed. What began as a recovery homecoming would become a reckoning with the people who claimed to love her most. The Chen family would never be the same after Maya learned the truth about what they had done to her body, her future, and her right to choose her own life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving Maya Chen standing on the sidewalk with her single duffel bag and a manila envelope containing her discharge papers. 6 months at Hillcrest Psychiatric Facility reduced to 1 bag. Everything she'd accumulated in her previous life seemingly evaporated during her absence. The house looked smaller than she remembered, the paint on the shutters slightly more faded, but otherwise unchanged. A sanctuary waiting for her return. Her mother appeared in the doorway before Maya could reach the front steps. Ruth Chen's smile was too bright, her movements too quick as she hurried down the path. "Maya, darling." Ruth's embrace felt rehearsed, lasting exactly the right amount of time. Not too long to suggest desperation, not too brief to appear cold. "How was the drive?" "Fine." Maya studied her mother's face. The woman who had raised her was always composed, every emotion carefully measured and controlled. But today, something flickered behind Ruth's dark eyes. Nervousness. "You look tired, Mom." "I've been preparing, making sure everything's ready for you." Ruth reached for Maya's bag. "Come inside. I made your favorite soup." The familiar scent of ginger and star anise greeted Maya as they entered. Her designer's eye automatically cataloged the subtle changes: new throw pillows on the couch, a different arrangement of family photos on the mantel, fresh flowers that seemed more for show than enjoyment. Details that suggested life had continued, evolved, in her absence. "I should go upstairs first," Maya said. "Get settled." Ruth's hand tightened on the bag handle. "Maybe you should eat something first. You look thin." "I'm fine." Maya gently took her bag back. "I just want to see my room." The stairs creaked in the same places they always had. Maya's hand trailed along the banister, muscle memory guiding her to the second landing. Her childhood bedroom waited at the end of the hall, the same room where she'd spent countless hours sketching, dreaming, planning her future with James. She paused at the door, key in hand, then turned the knob. The breath left her lungs in a sharp exhale. Soft yellow walls had replaced her familiar blue. A white crib stood where her desk used to be, mobile hanging above it featuring tiny elephants and stars. A changing table occupied the space beneath the window, fully stocked with diapers, wipes, and bottles. The subtle scent of baby powder hung in the air. Maya's legs felt unsteady. She gripped the doorframe, staring at the impossible transformation. This wasn't just a nursery. It was a fully functional, well-used nursery. Tiny clothes hung in the open closet. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a receiving blanket draped over its arm as if someone had just finished feeding a baby. On the dresser, folded carefully beside a stack of burp cloths, sat a piece of cream-colored stationery. Maya's name was written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened the note. "For our little miracle. The one thing that kept me going while you were away. Welcome home, Mommy. D." Maya read the words 3 times, searching her memory for any connection, any fragment of recollection. The handwriting was feminine, careful but completely foreign. D. She knew no one by that initial. No Diana, no Donna, no Danielle, and Mommy. The word felt alien, impossible. Maya had never been pregnant. The doctors at Hillcrest would have mentioned something so significant in her medical history. Wouldn't they? Maya? Ruth's voice came from the hallway, carefully casual. Everything all right up there? Maya turned, still holding the note. Her mother stood in the doorway, that same nervous energy radiating from her small frame. What is this? Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. Ruth's eyes darted to the note, then back to Maya's face. You should sit down, darling. Whose baby was in this room? Maya's professional training kicked in, her mind cataloging details with methodical precision. The crib mattress showed the indentation of regular use. The bottles on the changing table had been sterilized multiple times, their plastic slightly clouded. Recent purchases, but not new. Mom, whose baby? Ruth's hands twisted together, a gesture Maya recognized from childhood. Her mother's tell when caught in a difficult situation. I need to call David. He should be here for this conversation. No. Maya stepped toward her mother, the note still clutched in her hand. I need answers now. Who is Dee? Why is there a nursery in my room? Why can't I remember anything about this? Ruth's composure cracked slightly. You've been through so much trauma, sweetheart. The doctors said your memory might be. The doctors never mentioned a pregnancy. They never mentioned a baby. Maya's voice grew stronger, her confusion crystallizing into something sharper. I would remember being pregnant. I would remember having a child. Please, Maya, let me call David and Diana. They can explain better than I can. Diana. The name hung in the air between them. Maya tested it on her tongue, waiting for recognition that never came. Who is Diana? Ruth's face went pale. Your brother's wife. They got married while you were. Ruth's voice trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the small room. Maya sank onto the edge of the crib, the mobile swaying gently above her head. David had gotten married to someone named Diana. During her 6-month absence, the family had continued living, making major life decisions, while she existed in a medicated haze at Hillcrest. She signed this note D, Maya said, holding up the cream-colored paper. She's claiming this baby is mine. It's complicated. Ruth's voice was barely audible. Maya stood, studying her mother's face with the same analytical eye she once used to assess design projects. The nervous energy, the evasive answers, the way Ruth couldn't quite meet her gaze. All signs pointing to a larger deception. How complicated can it be, Mom? Either I had a baby or I didn't. Either I know this Diana person or I don't. Maya's voice carried an edge of authority that surprised them both. And right now, I'm telling you I don't remember any of this. Ruth fumbled for her phone. I'm calling David now. He needs to come over with Diana. They can explain everything properly. Maya watched her mother's hands shake as she dialed. The woman who had always been her anchor, the steady presence in a chaotic world, was falling apart in front of her, which meant whatever truth they were hiding was significant enough to fracture Ruth Chen's legendary composure. The mobile above the crib continued its slow rotation, casting dancing shadows on the yellow walls. Maya touched one of the elephants, setting it spinning faster. Somewhere in this house, in this family, lay answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. But as she stood in the transformed nursery, surrounded by evidence of a life she couldn't remember living, Maya realized the most disturbing truth of all. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear those answers. The sound of her mother's hushed, Phone conversation drifted from the hallway, urgent whispers that spoke of damage control and family meetings. Maya remained in the nursery, the note from D still in her hand, wondering if the sanctuary she'd been dreaming of for 6 months had actually been a carefully constructed lie. Maya remained in the nursery, the note from D still trembling. In her hand, as her mother's hushed conversation drifted from the hallway, Ruth's voice carried the particular cadence of damage control, urgent whispers punctuated by long pauses, the kind of call that changed everything. "They're coming now," Ruth announced, appearing in the doorway. Her composure had returned, but Maya recognized the performance. Years of reading people's expressions for design presentations had taught her to spot when someone was working too hard to appear calm. "How long will they take to get here?" 20 minutes, maybe less. Ruth stepped into the room, her eyes avoiding the crib. "Maya, before they arrive, I need you to understand that everyone has been trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Maya set the note back on the dresser, positioning it exactly where she'd found it. Her designer's instincts demanded precision, even in chaos. "From my own life?" Ruth's silence was answer enough. Maya heard the car doors slam in the driveway 18 minutes later. Through the nursery window, she watched a familiar figure emerge from a Honda Civic. David, her older brother, his shoulders carrying the weight she remembered from their father's funeral. But the woman who stepped out of the passenger side was a stranger. Diana Martinez moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. Long dark hair, early 30s, wearing jeans and a soft sweater that hugged her post-pregnancy curves. Maya's trained eye cataloged details automatically. The way Diana's hand rested protectively on the infant carrier, the practiced efficiency of her movements, the subtle exhaustion around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights with a newborn. "Maya." David's voice carried relief and apprehension in equal measure as he climbed the stairs. "God, it's good to see you." His embrace felt different than Ruth's, genuine but careful, as if he was afraid she might break. Behind him, Diana hung. Back, the baby carrier gripped in both hands like a shield. "This is Diana," David said, his arm still around Maya's shoulders. "My wife." Maya studied Diana's face, searching for any flicker of recognition. Nothing. This woman who had apparently been part of her family for months remained a complete stranger. "Hello, Maya." Diana's voice was soft, musical, with the slightest hint of an accent. "I've been looking forward to meeting you properly." The word properly hung in the air with careful weight. Maya caught the implication. They had met before. During her hospitalization, though Maya retained no memory of those encounters. "You wrote this." Maya held up the note, watching Diana's reaction. A slight flinch, a quick glance at David. Confirmation enough. "I did." Diana set the infant carrier on the floor, then straightened to meet Maya's gaze. "During a very difficult time. I probably shouldn't have left it there like that, but What difficult time?" Maya's interruption was sharp, her patience, for vague explanations, exhausted. "And why did you call me Mommy?" The three family members exchanged glances. A complex communication Maya couldn't decode but recognized as practiced coordination. They had discussed this moment, planned their responses. Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure. "I was going through postpartum depression. Writing that note helped me process some complicated feelings about family and connection, and that's not an answer." Maya's voice carried the authority she once used with difficult clients. "You signed a note calling me Mommy and left it in a nursery in my bedroom. I want to know why." Ruth moved closer to Diana, a subtle gesture of support that Maya noted. With growing unease, the family was choosing sides, and Maya found herself on the outside. "Maybe we should sit down for this conversation," David suggested. "Somewhere more comfortable." "I'm comfortable here." Maya crossed her arms. "In my room. That's apparently been converted into a nursery without my knowledge or consent." David's jaw tightened at her tone. Maya, you've been through significant trauma. The doctors said you might have some memory gaps, and we thought— Stop. Maya held up her hand. Stop telling me what the doctors said. Stop telling me what you thought was best for me. I want to know what happened. All of it. Diana knelt beside the infant carrier, lifting out a tiny baby with wispy dark hair and Maya's mother's distinctive cheekbones. The infant was maybe 4 months old, Maya estimated, still in that phase where every movement was uncoordinated but purposeful. This is Lily, Diana said, her voice thick with emotion. Your niece. Maya stared at the baby, waiting for some surge of recognition or connection. Nothing came. Just the clinical observation that Lily was healthy, well cared for, and bore a striking resemblance to baby photos of David. She's beautiful. Maya's response felt hollow, obligatory. But that still doesn't explain the note or the nursery. The nursery is here because Diana was staying here during her pregnancy, Ruth interjected, to help with the baby preparations. It seemed practical to set everything up in the extra room. My room isn't an extra room. Maya's control was fraying. It's my room, with my things, my life. Your things are in storage, David said quietly. We packed them carefully. Everything's safe. The casual destruction of her space, the assumption that she wouldn't mind, hit Maya like a physical blow. They had erased her presence as if she had died instead of gotten sick. Diana stepped forward, still holding Lily. Maya, I know this is overwhelming, but you have to understand, when you were at your worst, talking about the baby helped you. You were excited about being an aunt. You suggested using your room for the nursery because you wanted to be close to her when you came home. Maya's breath caught. The first specific claim about her own involvement, her own choices. But the memory remained elusive, like trying to grasp smoke. I don't remember any of that. The doctors said some memories might not come back, Ruth said gently. Especially from right before the accident. That's normal after trauma. Normal. Maya was beginning to hate that word. Nothing about this situation felt normal. Not the nursery, not the sister-in-law she didn't remember, not the careful way her family watched her every reaction. I need to see my medical records, Maya said. All of them, including any mentions of pregnancy or babies or family planning. Another exchanged glance between the three of them. David cleared his throat. Maya, you're still fragile. Dr. Vasquez recommended taking things slowly, not overwhelming. Yourself with too much information at once. Dr. Vasquez works for me, not for you. Maya's voice rose slightly. And I'm not fragile. I'm confused. There's a difference. Diana shifted Lily to her other arm, the baby making soft cooing sounds. We're not your enemies, Maya. We're your family. Everything we've done has been out of love. Love. Maya studied their faces, David's protective concern, Ruth's traditional stoicism, Diana's tearful sincerity. She wanted to believe them. But love that required lies and memory gaps didn't feel like love at all. It felt like control. I want to see those medical records, Maya repeated. And I want to know exactly what happened during the 6 months. I was gone. All of it. David sighed. Maybe we should call Dr. Vasquez first. Get her input on how to proceed. Stop managing me. Maya's words cut through the room like a blade. I'm not a patient anymore. I'm not your responsibility. I'm an adult who deserves to know her own life. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths and carefully maintained deceptions. Maya realized that recovering her memories was going to require more than medical records and family conversations. It was going to require finding allies who hadn't spent the last 6 months protecting her from herself. Maya waited until the sound of David's Honda faded down the street before pulling out her phone. The family had left with promises to give her space and time to process, but their carefully worded reassurances felt like additional layers of protection she hadn't asked for. The business card Dr. Vasquez had given her at discharge was tucked in her wallet, slightly worn from Maya's nervous handling during the taxi ride home. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Dr. Vasquez speaking. It's Maya Chen. Maya paced the length of her childhood bedroom, now the nursery, stepping carefully around scattered baby toys. I need to request my complete medical file. A pause. When Dr. Vasquez spoke again, her tone had shifted to something more cautious. Maya, how are you settling in at home? Is everything going well with your family? The question felt loaded, as if Dr. Vasquez was fishing for specific information. Maya's designer instincts, honed by years of reading between the lines in client meetings, detected something rehearsed in the response. That's actually why I'm calling. There are some gaps in my memory that I'd like to address with my medical records, particularly anything related to pregnancy or family planning discussions. Silence stretched across the line. Maya could hear papers rustling, the soft click of keyboard keys. Maya, I'm not sure what you mean by pregnancy discussions. Can you be more specific about what's concerning you? The careful deflection confirmed Maya's growing suspicions. Dr. Vasquez knew something, but was choosing her words with the precision of someone navigating legal and ethical boundaries. I came home to find my bedroom converted into a nursery, with a note suggesting I'm someone's mother. My family claims I was involved in planning this, but I have no memory of any of it. Maya kept her voice steady, professional. I need to see my complete file, including any sections that might have been restricted during my recovery. Another pause, longer this time. Maya could practically hear Dr. Vasquez weighing her options. I can certainly provide you with your medical records. However, some portions were marked for gradual disclosure based on your family's concerns about your emotional stability. Your brother, as your healthcare proxy, felt, my brother isn't my healthcare proxy anymore. Maya's interruption was sharp. I'm competent to make my own medical decisions now. I want everything. Of course, you're absolutely right. Dr. Vasquez's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern beneath. Maya, I should mention that you did have visitors during your stay. Several, actually. More than what's typical for our long-term patients. Maya's grip tightened. On the phone. What kind of visitors? Family members primarily. Your brother and mother came regularly, which we expected. But there were others. A young woman who visited frequently, especially in your final months with us. She seemed very invested in your recovery. Diana. It had to be Diana, though Dr. Vasquez was clearly avoiding names. Did I interact with these visitors? Have conversations? That's where things become complicated. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried the weight of difficult memories. Your condition was variable. There were periods when you were quite lucid and engaged, especially toward the end of your stay. But there were also times when you were heavily medicated for your own safety. Maya sank into the rocking chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. The idea that she had carried on relationships, made decisions, participated in family planning while in a medicated haze felt like a violation of her own agency. I need to see you in person, Maya said. Today, if possible. Maya, I'm not sure that's necessary. I can have your records prepared and sent. Dr. Vasquez. Maya's voice carried the authority she once used with vendors who tried to delay project deliveries. Something significant happened during my time at Hillcrest. My family is being evasive, and now you're being careful with your words. I need to understand what I've forgotten, and I need to understand it today. A long sigh across the phone line. I have an opening at 4 o'clock, but Maya, I want you to prepare yourself. Some of what you've forgotten might have been forgotten for protective reasons. Maya ended the call and immediately searched for a ride-sharing app. Ruth had mentioned that Maya's car was in storage along with her other belongings. Another decision made without her input. The systematic erasure of her independent life was becoming more apparent with each discovery. The drive to Hillcrest Psychiatric Facility took 45 minutes through late afternoon traffic. Maya watched familiar neighborhoods roll past, trying to remember the last time she had traveled these roads. The memories remained stubbornly absent, leaving her feeling like a tourist in her own life. Hillcrest looked smaller and less imposing than Maya remembered. The brick buildings that had seemed like fortress walls during her admission now appeared almost residential, nestled among mature oak trees. She checked in at the main desk, noting how the staff recognized her with a mixture of professional warmth and underlying concern. Dr. Vasquez's office was exactly as Maya remembered: diplomas on the wall, comfortable chairs arranged for conversation, tissues placed strategically, within reach. But Dr. Vasquez herself looked older, more tired than Maya recalled from their final sessions. "You look well," Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing for Maya to sit. "Healthier than I've seen you in months. I feel like I'm missing 6 months of my life." Maya settled into the familiar chair, muscle memory bringing back the rhythm of their previous sessions. "And everyone seems determined to keep it that way." Dr. Vasquez opened a thick file, Maya's file, and paged through it slowly. "Your family was very concerned about your ability to process certain information during your recovery. They requested that we withhold some details until you were stronger." "What kind of details?" Dr. Vasquez turned to a section marked with several colorful tabs. "You had some very intense conversations during your lucid periods, about your future, about family planning, about your relationship with your brother and his wife." Maya leaned forward. "Diana." "Yes, Diana Martinez." Dr. Vasquez's confirmation felt like a small victory. "She visited you regularly, especially during your final 3 months with us. You two developed quite a close relationship. But I don't remember her at all." That's not uncommon with trauma-related memory loss. Sometimes the mind protects itself by blocking not just the traumatic event, but everything connected to that emotional period. Dr. Vasquez flipped to another section of the file. "Maya, during your stay here, you made some decisions about your future medical care. Specifically, you signed consent forms for certain procedures." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya's blood chilled. "What kind of procedures?" Dr. Vasquez met her gaze directly for the first time since Maya had arrived. "Egg retrieval and storage. You were very concerned about preserving your fertility options for the future, especially given your emotional state and the medications you were taking." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Maya gripped the arms of her chair, processing the implications. "When did this happen?" "About 4 months ago." "You were having a particularly good week, very clear and focused. Diana was with you when you made the decision. She drove you to the appointments." Maya's mind raced through the timeline. 4 months ago would have been when Diana was pregnant, when the nursery was being set up, when major family decisions were being made while Maya existed in a medicated haze. "Dr. Vasquez," Maya said carefully, "is there any possibility that my eggs were used for something other than storage?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Vasquez's professional composure finally cracked, revealing the ethical dilemma that had clearly been weighing on her for months. "Maya," she said quietly, "I think you need to have a very serious conversation with your family." Maya sat in the parking lot of Hillcrest for 20 minutes after leaving Dr. Vasquez's office, her hands gripping the steering wheel of the rideshare driver's car while he waited patiently. The revelation about her eggs, about decisions made during her lucid periods, churned in her stomach like poison. She needed to process this information before confronting her family again, needed some objective perspective from someone who wasn't invested in protecting her from the truth. The driver dropped her off at home just as the sun was beginning to set. Maya stood on the sidewalk, studying her childhood home with new eyes. The carefully maintained lawn, the fresh paint on the shutters, the general air of prosperity and stability. It all felt like stage dressing now, a carefully constructed facade hiding family secrets. Movement in the yard next door caught her attention. A man in his 40s was wrestling with a stubborn rosebush, muttering under his breath as thorns caught his work gloves. Maya remembered Ruth mentioning new neighbors during one of their phone calls to Hillcrest, but the details had been vague. She approached the low fence separating the properties. "Excuse me." The man looked up, pushing a baseball cap back on his graying hair. His face was weathered but kind, with the sort of laugh lines that suggested someone who smiled often despite recent hardships. "You must be Maya," he said, straightening up and pulling off his gloves. "Jake Morrison. I moved in about 8 months ago." He paused, his expression shifting to something more gentle. "I heard about your accident. Glad to see you're doing better." Maya appreciated the directness. No careful dancing around her mental health, no treating her like fragile glass. "Thank you. I'm still getting reacquainted with the neighborhood." Jake nodded toward her house. "Been pretty quiet over there since you got back this morning. Different from the last few months." Something in his tone made Maya's attention sharpen. Different how? Jake glanced toward her house, then back to Maya. His expression suggested he was weighing his words carefully, but not for the same protective reasons as her family. "Well, there was a lot more activity before, especially the last 4 months or so." Maya stepped closer to the fence. "What kind of activity?" "Your brother and his wife were here almost daily. David, right? And Diana?" Jake's casual use of their names confirmed he'd been paying attention to the comings and goings next door. She was here overnight a lot, especially toward the end of her pregnancy. The timeline clicked into place. Diana had been staying at Maya's house during her pregnancy, using Maya's room, making decisions about Maya's life while Maya was medicated and vulnerable. "You said end of her pregnancy?" Jake nodded, pulling a pruning shear from his tool belt. "Yeah, she was pretty far along when I first noticed her coming around regularly. Maybe 6 or 7 months? Hard to tell exactly, but she was definitely showing." He paused, studying Maya's face. She seemed nice enough. Always waved when she saw me in the yard. Maya's designer mind cataloged the timeline. Diana had been visibly pregnant 6 months ago, which meant Lily was born around the time Maya was having her lucid periods at Hillcrest. The same period when she'd made decisions about egg retrieval. "Did you see much of the baby after she was born?" Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the thing. I didn't see Diana with a baby for the longest time. Your mom, Ruth, was the one I saw carrying the little one around, usually late at night or early morning. Diana would come by, but she looked." He searched for the right words. "Tired. Sad, maybe? Like she was going through something difficult." Maya's pulse quickened. "When did you first see Diana with the baby?" "Maybe 3 weeks ago? She started bringing the little girl over during the day, but even then, it seemed like your mom was doing most of the caretaking." Jake resumed his work on the rosebush, but his attention remained focused on their conversation. "I probably shouldn't be sharing neighborhood gossip, but you seem like you're trying to piece some things together." "I am." Maya's honesty felt refreshing after hours of careful family deflections. "I have some memory gaps from before my accident, and everyone's being very protective about filling them in." Jake nodded knowingly. "My ex-wife used to do that. After our divorce, she'd make decisions about our kids and then explain them to me later as if I'd been part of the conversation. His tone carried the weariness of someone who understood the frustration of being managed by well-meaning people. Sometimes people think they're helping when they're really just taking your choices away. The observation hit Maya like a physical blow. That was exactly what her family had done, taken her choices away under the guise of protection. What else did you notice about the activity at my house? Jake set down his pruning shears and gave Maya his full attention. Lots of deliveries, baby furniture, supplies, boxes from medical companies, all addressed to your house, but Diana was usually the one receiving them. He paused. There were also some late-night visitors. Medical people, I think, based on the way they dressed and the bags they carried. Maya's blood chilled. Medical visitors to her house while she was at Hillcrest? How often? 3 or 4 times that I saw. Always at night, always when Diana was staying over. They never stayed long, maybe an hour at most. Jake's expression grew concerned. Maya, I hope I'm not overstepping, but something about those visits bothered me. The secrecy of it. The timing. I'm probably reading too much into it. No, Maya said quickly. You're not. I think you're seeing things more clearly than anyone else has been willing to. Jake studied her face with the same attention he'd been giving his rosebush. You really don't remember any of this, do you? Maya shook her head. 6 months of my life are essentially gone. And everyone who claims to love me thinks I'm too fragile to handle the truth about my own life. That's rough. Jake's empathy felt genuine, unfiltered by family loyalty or protective instincts. For what it's worth, you don't seem fragile. To me. Confused, sure, but not fragile. The validation meant more than Maya expected. Here was someone who had no investment in her recovery, no agenda to protect her from difficult truths. His observations were objective, unfiltered by love or guilt. Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Shoot. During those months when Diana was staying here, did you ever see me? Any sign that I was living? Here or visiting? Jake's answer came without hesitation. Never. The house was active, but it was like you didn't exist. Diana and your family were living some version of your life, but you weren't part of it. The words crystallized Maya's growing understanding. Her family hadn't just protected her from difficult truths. They had constructed an entire alternative reality in her absence, making decisions about her body, her future, her living space, while she existed in a medicated haze. Maya, Jake said gently, I don't know what happened to you, and I don't know what your family's been telling you. But if you ever need someone who isn't invested in managing your recovery, I'm right next door. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. The first, genuine emotion she'd experienced since coming home. Not the careful sympathy of family members walking on eggshells, but the straightforward kindness of someone who saw her as an adult, capable of handling difficult truths. Thank you, she said. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. As Maya walked back toward her house, Jake's observations swirled in her mind like pieces of a puzzle finally beginning to form a coherent picture. Diana's pregnancy timeline, the medical visitors, the systematic erasure of Maya's presence from her own home, it all pointed to a level of deception that went far beyond protective family lies. It suggested something much more complex and potentially devastating. Maya paused at her front door, hand on the knob, and realized she was no longer approaching her family with the desperate need for their approval and protection. She was approaching them as an investigator seeking answers to questions they clearly didn't want her to ask. The shift in perspective felt like the first real step toward reclaiming her own life. Maya stood at her front door for several minutes, Jake's observations echoing in her mind. The house felt different now, not like a sanctuary or even a family home, but like a crime scene where evidence had been carefully arranged to tell a particular story. She could hear voices inside, Ruth's measured tones mixing with Diana's softer responses. They were discussing her, planning their next approach. She pulled out her phone instead of going inside. "Diana? It's Maya. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere private. Just the two of us." The pause on the other end stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. "Of course," Diana finally said, her voice carefully controlled. "When were you thinking?" "Now. There's a coffee shop on Elm Street near the old bookstore. Do you know it?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Maya texted her mother that she was running errands and walked the 6 blocks to Grounded Coffee, a small independent shop she'd frequented before her breakdown. The familiar ritual of ordering her usual, dark roast, no cream, felt like muscle, memory returning. She chose a table in the back corner, away from the afternoon crowd of college students and remote workers. Diana arrived exactly 20 minutes later, without Lily. She looked around the coffee shop nervously before spotting Maya, her movements carrying the same careful energy Ruth had displayed that morning. "Thank you for suggesting this," Diana said, sliding into the chair across from Maya. She'd changed clothes since their earlier meeting, trading her casual sweater for a more formal blouse, as if preparing for a job interview rather than a family conversation. Maya studied Diana's face, still searching for any flicker of recognition. The woman was undeniably beautiful, with warm brown eyes and an expressive mouth that suggested someone who laughed easily. But she remained a complete stranger. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Maya began, keeping her voice neutral. "About the nursery, about the note. I'd like to understand your perspective without my family's input clouding the conversation." Diana's hands wrapped around her coffee cup, a nervous gesture that reminded Maya of Ruth's earlier anxiety. "What would you like to know?" "Start with the truth, all of it." Diana's careful composure cracked slightly. "Maya, the truth is complicated. There are things that happened while you were sick that might be difficult to hear. I'm not as fragile as everyone seems to think." Maya's voice carried an edge that made Diana look up sharply. "I spent an hour with my neighbor Jake this afternoon. He had some interesting observations about the activity at my house while I was gone." Diana's face went pale. "What kind of observations?" "Medical visitors, late-night meetings. You staying at my house for months while pregnant, but not seeming to have the baby with you after she was born." Maya leaned forward slightly. "Jake also mentioned that you looked sad during those visits, like you were going through something difficult." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained eye contact. "He's not wrong. So tell me what really happened." Diana took a shaky breath. "I struggled with infertility for 3 years before I met your family. 3 years of treatments, failures, miscarriages that David doesn't even know about. By the time we got married, I was convinced I'd never be able to have children." Maya waited, sensing there was more. "When your accident happened, when you had your breakdown, I was devastated. I know that sounds strange since we'd only met a few times, but you were so kind to me during David's and my engagement. You were the first person in his family who really welcomed me." Diana's voice grew softer. "Ruth was polite but distant. David was wonderful but protective. You were the one who asked about my dreams, my fears, my hopes for the future." A fragment of memory flickered, a conversation about wedding flowers, about the difference between loving someone and understanding them. Maya couldn't quite grasp it, but the emotional resonance felt familiar. "I visited you at Hillcrest every week," Diana continued. "Sometimes you were heavily medicated and didn't recognize me, but there were other times when you were completely lucid. We had long conversations about family, about the future, about what it meant to belong somewhere." "What did we talk about?" "Specifically," Diana's tears began to fall steadily now. "You were obsessed with the idea that you were broken, that the accident had taken away your ability to ever have a normal life, a family, children. You kept saying you felt like a burden, Like you'd never be able to contribute anything meaningful to the people you loved. Maya's chest tightened. The words rang true, matching her own darkest fears during her worst moments at Hillcrest. Then I got pregnant. Diana's voice dropped to almost a whisper. After years of trying, after accepting that it might never happen, I got pregnant right in the middle of your crisis. The guilt was overwhelming. Here I was, getting everything I'd ever wanted, while you were convinced you'd never have any of it. So you decided to share it with me. Diana nodded, wiping her eyes with a napkin. It started small, I'd tell you about the pregnancy during our visits, and you'd get so excited. For the first time since your accident, you seemed genuinely happy. You'd ask about symptoms, about preparations, about names. It gave you something to focus on besides your own pain. Maya was beginning to understand the twisted logic of the situation. And the nursery? That was your idea, actually. During one of your lucid periods, you suggested that I set up the nursery in your room. You said it would make you feel useful, like you were contributing to the baby's life, even though you couldn't be there. Diana's voice broke slightly. You said it would give you something to come home to. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more complex than Maya had expected. Not malicious deception, but a well-intentioned blurring of boundaries that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. The note, Maya said quietly. Diana nodded miserably. I wrote it during my darkest period after Lily was born. The postpartum depression hit me hard, and I was terrified I wasn't going to be a good mother. I kept thinking about all our conversations, about how you'd said you wanted to be part of her life, wanted to help raise her. In that moment, writing that note, it felt like I was honoring something sacred between us. But you called me Mommy. Diana's face crumpled. Because in my mind, you were going to be, not biologically, but emotionally. You were going to be the person who helped me figure out how to be a mother. You were going to be Lily's aunt, her godmother, her secondary parent. In my depression-addled brain, that felt like the same thing. Maya sat back in her chair, processing the emotional complexity of Diana's story. The woman across from her wasn't a villain or manipulator. She was someone who had tried to create connection and meaning in the midst of profound loss and fear. But there were still missing pieces. Diana, Maya said carefully, I need to ask you about something else, about medical procedures that happened while I was at Hillcrest. Diana's face went absolutely white. What about them? Did you know about my egg retrieval? About the fertility preservation procedures? Diana's silence was answer enough. Maya felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. Diana, is Lily my biological daughter? The question hung in the air between them like a live wire. Diana's tears had stopped, replaced by a look of absolute terror. Maya, she whispered, I swear to you that wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't the plan. Maya's world tilted sideways. The careful family protection, the nursery in her room, the note calling her Mommy. It wasn't metaphorical or emotional. It was literal. Whose plan was it? Maya's voice was deadly calm. Diana looked toward the coffee shop window as if considering escape. Your mother's, Ruth thought. She thought it would give you something to live for when you recovered. She thought you'd be grateful. Maya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to go home now. Maya, please. No. Maya's voice cut through Diana's. Please? I need to go home and have a conversation with my family, all of them. As she walked toward the door, Diana called after her. Maya, for what it's worth, I love her. I love Lily like she's my own daughter. But I've always known she wasn't. And I've always known that was wrong. Maya paused at the door, looking back at Diana's tear-streaked face. Then why didn't you stop it? Diana's answer was barely audible. Because I was scared if I did, I'd lose everything. David, the baby, the family I'd finally found. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. Maya left Diana sitting alone in the coffee shop and walked home through the gathering dusk, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd learned. The family protection, the careful management of her recovery, the systematic erasure of her autonomy. It had all been in service of a lie so profound it had rewritten the fundamental nature of her existence. She was a mother, and no one had told her. Maya reached her front door as the first streetlights flickered on, Diana's confession still echoing in her mind. Lily is my daughter. The words felt foreign, impossible, like trying to swallow something too large. She stood on the porch, key in hand, staring at the familiar brass doorknob as if it belonged to a stranger's house. Through the front window, she could see Ruth moving around the kitchen, probably preparing dinner with the same methodical precision she'd used throughout Maya's childhood. The normalcy of the scene felt obscene given what Maya had just learned. She turned the key and stepped inside. The house smelled of ginger and soy sauce, Ruth's comfort food, the dishes she made when the family needed grounding. Maya hung her jacket on the hook by the door, the same hook she'd used since she was 12 years old. That's when it hit her. The memory came like a physical blow, sudden and overwhelming. She was standing in this same hallway, but it was different. Earlier. Before Hillcrest. James was behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his voice warm in her ear. "Your mom's making enough food for an army again," he'd said, laughing. "She's nervous about meeting my parents next week." Maya's knees buckled. She gripped the doorframe, the present moment fracturing as the suppressed memory flooded back. James, her fiancé, the man she'd been planning to marry before the accident, stole everything from her. "Maya?" Ruth's voice came from the kitchen doorway, concerned. "Darling, are you all right?" But Maya couldn't respond. The memories were cascading now, 6 months of carefully suppressed experiences breaking through the protective barriers her mind had constructed. James proposing on the bridge where they'd had their first date. The weight of the ring on her finger, the way it caught the light when she moved her hands. Planning their wedding for the following spring. Discussing children, careers, the house they'd looked at on Maple Street with the big backyard and the studio space where Maya could work. "I remember him," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "I remember James." Ruth's face went pale. She moved toward Maya, hands outstretched, but Maya backed away. "You didn't tell me I was engaged. You didn't tell me I was planning to get married. Maya, sweetheart, you need to sit down. These memories, they're going to be difficult." More fragments surfaced, pieces of conversations, moments of joy and terror intertwined. James picking her up for their last date, the way he'd smiled when she'd suggested they visit David and Diana that evening. Diana had just announced her pregnancy, and Maya had been so excited to share the news with James. The memory of that night came back in painful detail. Diana's tearful confession about her years of infertility, her joy at finally being pregnant, her fears about being a good mother. Maya had hugged her sister-in-law, promising to help with everything, to be the best aunt possible. And then, the conversation that changed everything. "You should have children too," Diana had said, her hand resting on her barely showing belly. "You and James would make incredible parents." Maya remembered her response, the words that had seemed so innocent at the time. "We've talked about it. We want to start trying after the wedding." But James had been quiet that night. Unusually quiet. And when they'd left David and Diana's house, he'd suggested they take the long way home, through the winding mountain roads where the accident would happen 20 minutes later. "Maya, please sit down." Ruth's voice was closer now, more urgent. "These memories are going to be overwhelming." Maya ignored her mother, closing her eyes and letting the suppressed experiences flow through her consciousness. The argument in the car. James's sudden confession that he wasn't sure he was ready for marriage, for children, for the future they'd been planning. His admission that he'd been having doubts for weeks but hadn't known how to tell her. Maya remembered her response. The hurt, the confusion, the desperate attempt to understand how the man she loved could suddenly question everything they'd built together. She remembered raising her voice, demanding answers, pushing him to explain. What had changed? She remembered the moment when James, frustrated and overwhelmed, had taken his eyes off the road to look at her. She remembered the tree. Oh, God! Maya's legs gave out completely. She slid down the wall, her body shaking as the full weight of the suppressed memories crashed over her. The accident was my fault. Ruth was beside her instantly, gathering Maya into her arms the way she had when Maya was a child. No, darling, no, it wasn't your fault. But Maya could see it all now with terrible clarity. James had died because she'd been pushing him for answers while he was driving, because she'd been so desperate to understand his doubts that she'd ignored the dangerous mountain road, the weather conditions, the fact that emotional conversations and driving didn't mix. I killed him, Maya whispered into her mother's shoulder. I killed the man I loved. Maya, listen to me. Ruth's voice was firm, cutting through Maya's spiral of guilt. The accident was not your fault. James chose to drive those roads. James chose to have that conversation while driving. You were both young and scared and trying to figure out your future. More memories surfaced as Ruth held her. The weeks after the accident, the crushing weight of guilt and grief. The way she'd retreated from everyone, including her family. The dangerous thoughts that had scared Ruth and David enough to seek professional help. And then the memories from right before her breakdown, the ones her family had been most desperate to protect her from. Maya remembered sitting in this same hallway, but weeks earlier, when Diana had come to visit. Diana had been about 4 months pregnant then, glowing with the joy of finally carrying a child. Maya had been in the depths of her grief, convinced that she would never deserve happiness again after what had happened to James. I want to help, Maya had said to Diana that day. I want to be part of this baby's life in every way possible. Diana had been hesitant. Maya, you're going through so much right now. You need to focus on your own healing. But Maya had been insistent, desperate to find some way to create meaning from her loss. No, you don't understand. I need this. I need to know that something good can come from all this pain. The conversation that followed came back to Maya in fragments. Her suggestion that Diana stay at the house during the pregnancy, her offer to help with all the preparations, her emotional declaration that she wanted to be like a second mother to the baby. If I can't have children of my own, Maya remembered saying, at least I can help raise yours. Maya lifted her head from Ruth's shoulder, the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. I suggested the nursery. I suggested using my room. Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face. You were so insistent. You said it would give you something to focus on, something to look forward to. But I also suggested something else. Didn't I? Maya's voice grew stronger as more memories surfaced. I suggested that if Diana had trouble getting pregnant again, if she needed help, that I would. Maya's voice trailed off as the most devastating memory of all returned. She remembered the conversation with Dr. Vasquez during one of her early visits to Hillcrest. The discussion about fertility preservation, about protecting her options for the future. Maya had been lucid that day, terrified that her breakdown and the medications would affect her ability to have children someday. But she also remembered making another suggestion, one born from her desperate need to create meaning from her loss and her overwhelming guilt about James's death. I told Dr. Vasquez that if Diana needed help, if she couldn't carry another child, she could use my eggs. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. I gave permission for them to help Diana have more children using my genetic material. Ruth's silence confirmed what Maya had suspected. The egg retrieval hadn't been about preserving Maya's future options. It had been about giving Diana the large family she'd always wanted, using Maya's biology to fulfill dreams that infertility had threatened. But something went wrong, Maya continued, the full scope of the deception becoming clear. Diana got pregnant naturally with Lily, but by then, my eggs had already been retrieved, so the family decided to use them anyway to give Diana the child I'd promised to help her have. Ruth's hold on Maya tightened. We thought you'd be happy. We thought when you recovered, you'd see Lily as the child you'd wanted to help create. Maya pulled away from her mother's embrace, the weight of the recovered memories settling into her bones like lead. She understood now why her mind had suppressed these experiences, the guilt over James's death, the desperate bargain she'd tried to make with Diana, the way her family had interpreted her emotional breakdown as informed consent. It was all too much to process while she was fighting for her sanity. But she also understood something else. Her family hadn't just betrayed her trust by using her eggs without her clear consent. They had taken advantage of her mental health crisis to fulfill their own vision of what her life should look like. I need to see her, Maya said quietly. I need to see Lily. Ruth nodded, understanding that this conversation was far from over. She's upstairs in the nursery. Diana brought her back after you left for coffee. Maya stood on unsteady legs, her recovered memories still settling into place like sediment after a storm. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step bringing her closer to meeting the daughter she'd never known she had. The daughter who existed because her family had decided her broken heart needed fixing, whether she remembered asking for it or not. Maya paused at the top of the stairs, her hand resting on the banister as the weight of her recovered memories settled around her like lead. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, soft light spilling into the hallway. She could hear the gentle sounds of Diana moving around inside, the soft coo of baby talk, the rustle of a diaper change, the creak of the rocking chair. Taking a deep breath, Maya pushed the door open. Diana looked up from the changing table, where she was dressing Lily in a fresh onesie. Her eyes were red from crying, but her movements with the baby were confident, practiced, loving. Lily gurgled contentedly, her tiny fists waving in the air as Diana fastened the snaps. Maya. Diana's voice was barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure you'd want to see her tonight. Maya stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on the baby who was, genetically speaking, her daughter. Lily had grown since the photos Maya remembered, seeing during her lucid periods at Hillcrest. Her features were more defined now, her dark hair thicker. Maya could see traces of herself in the baby's face, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, mixed with features that didn't belong to either Maya or Diana. She's beautiful, Maya said, the words feeling both true and hollow. She looks healthy. Diana finished dressing Lily and lifted her from the changing table, cradling her against her chest. She is healthy, perfect, actually, the doctors said. Diana's voice trailed off as she realized she was about to share medical information that Maya, as the biological mother, should have received directly. What did the doctors say, Diana? Diana's face crumpled. Maya, I know you have questions, and you deserve answers. But I need you to understand that when this all started, I thought I was honoring your wishes. Maya moved closer, studying Lily's face. The baby stared back at her with the unfocused attention of a 4-month-old. But there was something in her expression that felt familiar, like looking into a mirror that reflected back generations rather than just her own image. Tell me exactly how this happened. All of it. Diana sank into the rocking chair, Lily, still cradled in her arms. After your breakdown, after you were admitted to Hillcrest, your family was desperate to find ways to help you heal. Ruth, especially, was convinced that you needed something to live for when you recovered. Maya remained standing, her arms crossed. Go on. During your lucid periods, you talked about wanting to help me have children. You were obsessed with the idea that your life had to mean something after James's death. You kept saying you wanted to give me the large family I'd always dreamed of. Diana's voice grew softer. When Dr. Vasquez mentioned fertility preservation because of your medications, you immediately suggested that I could use your eggs if I ever needed them. But you got pregnant naturally. Diana nodded. I did, with Lily. But by then, the egg retrieval had already been scheduled. You were so insistent during your lucid period that we shouldn't cancel it. You kept saying that this was your way of ensuring that something good could come from your tragedy. Maya felt a chill run through her. So you went through with the retrieval even though you were already pregnant. Ruth convinced us it was the right thing to do. She said that when you recovered, you'd want options. You'd want to know that you could still have a family, still contribute to the next generation. Diana's voice broke slightly. But then complications arose during my pregnancy. The doctors were concerned about my ability to carry future children. Maya's stomach dropped. What kind of complications? Placental issues, severe gestational, diabetes. The doctor said I probably shouldn't attempt another pregnancy. Diana looked down at Lily, stroking her soft hair. But you had been so excited about helping me have multiple children. Ruth suggested that maybe we could use your eggs for a surrogate, so you could still give me the large family you'd promised. But Lily isn't from a surrogate. She's your biological daughter that you carried and delivered. Diana's silence stretched too long. Maya felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as another possibility occurred to her. Diana, is Lily your biological daughter or mine? Diana's tears began falling again. Maya, the medical procedures were complex. There were options we didn't fully understand at the time. Answer the question. Diana looked up at Maya with an expression of absolute devastation. Both. Neither. It's complicated. Maya's mind raced through the medical possibilities. Diana, what exactly did they do with my eggs? Your family made the decision while you were having one of your worst episodes at Hillcrest. You'd been talking for weeks about wanting to give me children, about how that was the only way your life could have meaning. Ruth was terrified you were going to hurt yourself again if you didn't have something concrete to live for. Maya's voice turned deadly calm. What decision did they make? They had the fertility clinic combine your eggs with David's sperm. Diana's words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make them hurt less. The idea was that the baby would be genetically yours and David's, a true Chen family child, but I would carry her and raise her. Everyone would get what they wanted. Maya staggered backward, gripping the edge of the dresser for support. You're telling me that Lily is genetically my child and my brother's child? Diana nodded miserably. But Maya, you have to understand. The decision was made when everyone thought you might not survive your breakdown. Ruth was convinced that having a genetic child, even one raised by someone else, would give you something to live for when you recovered. The full scope of her family's betrayal crashed over Maya like a physical blow. They hadn't just used her eggs without clear consent. They had created a child using her genetic material and her brother's, essentially making Maya a mother and David a father without either of them being capable of fully informed consent at the time. Does David know? Maya's voice was barely audible. He knows now. Ruth told him after the procedure was already done. He was devastated. But by then, I was already pregnant, and everyone was committed to making the best of the situation. Maya's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, staring at the baby who was both her daughter and her niece, carried by her sister-in-law and created through a medical procedure she had no memory of consenting to. Maya, Diana said gently, I know this is overwhelming, but you have to know that everyone involved loved you. Everyone was trying to save your life. Maya looked up at Diana, who was still cradling Lily with obvious affection and competence. Do you love her? More than my own life, Diana answered without hesitation. "I know the circumstances were wrong, but Maya, I love her completely. She's been my daughter since the moment I felt her move in my womb." "But she's not your daughter. She's mine." Diana's tears fell faster. "Biologically, yes, but in every other way that matters, she's been mine. I carried her, delivered her, fed her, stayed up with her through every sleepless night. I know that doesn't change the genetics, but Maya, I am her mother in every way except DNA." Maya studied Lily's face again, looking for traces of David in her features. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see it. The shape of her nose, the set of her ears, the way she moved her hands. David's daughter. Maya's daughter. A child created from a family's desperate attempt to manufacture meaning from tragedy. "Maya," Diana whispered, "what happens now?" Maya didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about legal implications, about consent and medical ethics, about the profound violation of her bodily autonomy. But she was also thinking about the baby herself, innocent of the complicated circumstances of her conception, deserving of love and stability, regardless of the questionable decisions that had brought her into existence. "I don't know," Maya finally said. "I need to talk to David. I need to understand his part in this." Diana nodded. "He's downstairs with your mother. They've been waiting for you to process everything." Maya stood slowly, her legs still unsteady. "Diana, I need you to understand something. What my family did, what you all did, was wrong. The intentions might have been good, but the execution was a violation of everything I should have had control over." "I know," Diana whispered. "I've known it was wrong from the beginning. But I was scared to speak up, scared to lose the family I'd finally found." Maya looked at Lily one more time before heading toward the door. "Take care of her tonight. But Diana, we're going to have to figure out what comes next. Because this child deserves better than being the product of well-intentioned deception." As Maya left the nursery and headed downstairs to confront David and Ruth, she realized that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the fact that she was now responsible for a child she'd never chosen to conceive, in circumstances she'd never agreed to, with a man who was both her brother and the unwitting father of her daughter. The truth about Lily wasn't just complicated. It was legally, ethically, and emotionally catastrophic. Maya descended the stairs, with measured steps, each footfall echoing through the house like a countdown. She could hear voices in the living room, David's deep murmur mixing with Ruth's sharper tones. They were discussing strategy, she realized, planning their approach for when she emerged from the nursery. Even now, even with the truth partially revealed, they were still trying to manage her reaction. She paused in the doorway, studying the tableau before her. David sat hunched forward on the couch, his hands clasped tightly between his knees, the posture of a man carrying unbearable weight. Ruth occupied her usual chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the picture of controlled composure even as her world unraveled. They looked up as Maya entered, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and terror. "Maya," David began, starting to rise. "How are you feeling?" Diana said, "Sit down, David." Maya's voice cut through his words with surgical precision. "We need to talk. All of us. And for once, I want the complete truth without any protective editing." David sank back onto the couch, his face pale. Ruth's hands tightened in her lap, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Maya remained standing, positioning herself where she could see both of them clearly. Years of client presentations had taught her the importance of controlling the physical dynamics of difficult conversations. "I remember now," she said simply. "Not everything, but enough. I remember James. I remember the accident. I remember the conversations with Diana about wanting to help her have children. I remember suggesting the egg retrieval to Dr. Vasquez." Ruth's carefully maintained composure flickered slightly. "Maya, darling, those memories might not be entirely reliable. Trauma can— Mom, stop. Maya's interruption was gentle but firm. Stop trying to manage my recovery. Stop trying to protect me from my own life. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a reckoning. She turned her attention to David, who looked like he was about to be sick. Diana told me about Lily's conception, about how my eggs were combined with your sperm to create her. What I want to know is how much you knew about this decision before it was made. David's face crumpled. Maya, I swear to you, I didn't know until after the procedure was already done. Mom presented it to me as a fait accompli. But you knew about the egg retrieval itself. David nodded miserably. You had talked about it during one of your visits. You were so insistent that Diana should be able to use your eggs if she needed them. Dr. Vasquez had recommended fertility preservation anyway because of your medications, so it seemed like you were just being prepared for future possibilities. Maya studied her brother's face, reading the truth in his expression. David's guilt was genuine, but it was the guilt of someone who had allowed himself to be swept along by events rather than someone who had actively orchestrated them. And when did you learn that the eggs had been fertilized with your sperm? 3 weeks before Lily was born. David's voice was barely audible. Mom told me that the fertility clinic had made a mistake, that there had been some confusion about the intended sperm donor, and that by the time they realized the error, Diana was already in her 3rd trimester. Maya's blood ran cold. That's not what Diana just told me upstairs. She said the decision was made deliberately by the family, while I was having a difficult episode at Hillcrest. David's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he looked at Ruth. Mom, you told me it was a medical error. Ruth's composure finally cracked completely. Her hands began to shake, and her voice carried the tremor of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. I was trying to protect both of you, she said. Maya was talking about suicide again. She was convinced that her life had no meaning, that she could never contribute anything good to the world after what happened to James. The doctors were concerned she might attempt to harm herself. Maya felt her anger building, but she kept her voice level. So you decided to manufacture meaning for my life without my consent. You had given consent, Ruth said desperately. You told Diana repeatedly that you wanted to help her have children. You told Dr. Vasquez to preserve your eggs for family use. You suggested the nursery in your room. Every decision we made was based on something you had specifically requested. Mom, Maya said, her voice carrying the patient tone she might use with a confused child. There's a difference between saying, I want to help Diana have children someday, and consenting to have my eggs fertilized with my brother's sperm to create a child I would never know I had conceived. David stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Jesus Christ, Mom, you told me it was an accident. You let me believe that some incompetent lab technician had mixed up samples. Because I knew you would never have agreed to it if you'd understood. What was really happening? Ruth said, tears beginning to flow. And Maya was so sick, David, so desperately sick. She needed something to anchor her to life. And the baby seemed like what? Maya's voice rose for the first time. A convenient solution to your emotional discomfort? A way to fix your daughter without having to deal with the messy reality of mental illness and grief? Ruth flinched as if Maya had struck her. That's not fair. Fair? Maya's laugh was bitter. Mom, you violated my bodily autonomy in the most fundamental way possible. You used my genetic material to create a child without my knowledge or consent. You involved David in this deception without his full understanding. You manipulated Diana's desperation for children to make her complicit in your scheme. And you did all of this while I was mentally incapacitated and unable to advocate for myself. She turned to David, who was standing with his back to them, staring out the window. David, did it ever occur to you to question the medical error story? To ask for documentation from the fertility clinic? To demand an investigation into how such a significant mistake could happen? David's shoulders sagged. I was scared, he admitted. I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, if I made waves, something would happen to disrupt Diana's pregnancy. She was already high risk, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing the baby because of some investigation. So you chose to protect Diana's pregnancy over my right to informed consent. I chose to protect the baby, David said, turning to face Maya. An innocent child who didn't ask to be conceived under these circumstances. Once Diana was pregnant, once the baby was growing, what was I supposed to do? Demand that she abort? A healthy pregnancy because of the questionable circumstances of conception? Maya stared at her brother, seeing him clearly for the first time since her return. David wasn't malicious or manipulative. He was weak. Faced with an impossible situation, he had chosen the path of least resistance, the option that allowed him to avoid making difficult moral choices. You were supposed to tell me the truth when I recovered, Maya said. You were supposed to let me make my own decisions about how to handle the situation. And what decisions would you have made? Ruth interjected, her voice carrying a note of desperation. If we had told you immediately upon your return that you had a 4-month-old daughter you'd never met, what would you have done? Maya considered the question seriously. I don't know, Mom. And that's the point. Those should have been my choices. To make. My consequences to live with. My life to navigate. You didn't trust me enough to handle my own reality. She moved to the center of the room, positioning herself so she could see both David and Ruth clearly. But let's talk about what I would do now, because this situation is far from resolved. David and Ruth exchanged glances, fear evident in their expressions. First, Maya said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she'd once used in high stakes. Design presentations. I want complete medical documentation of everything that was done. Every procedure, every consent form, every communication between the family and the medical professionals. I want to understand the full scope of what happened while I was incapacitated. Ruth nodded reluctantly. Maya, I can get you those records, but you have to understand that everyone involved was trying to help. Second, Maya continued, cutting off Ruth's attempt at justification. I want a legal consultation to understand my rights and options. What was done to me may have been well-intentioned, but it was also potentially criminal. Medical procedures performed without proper consent, use of genetic material without authorization, conspiracy to deceive a patient about her own medical history. These aren't just ethical violations, Mom. They're potentially felonies. David's face went white. Maya, you're not seriously considering pressing charges against your own family. I'm considering all of my options, Maya replied evenly, which is something I should have been allowed to do from the beginning. She paused, studying their faces. Third, I want to understand the current legal status of Lily, who is listed as her legal parents. What documentation exists of her conception and birth? What rights do I have as her biological mother, and what obligations? Ruth and David remained silent, the weight of Maya's questions settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each demand. Fourth, I want complete transparency about the financial aspects of this situation. Who paid for the medical procedures? Who's paying for Lily's care? Are there insurance implications? Tax implications? Legal trusts or guardianship arrangements I should know about? Maya, David said quietly, I can see that you're angry, and you have every right to be. But can we talk about what's best for Lily? She's an innocent child who needs stability and love, regardless of the circumstances of her conception. Maya's expression softened slightly as she thought about the baby upstairs. David, I agree that Lily deserves stability and love. But she also deserves a family built on truth rather than deception. And I deserve to know my daughter. The word daughter hung in the air between them, heavy with implications none of them had fully processed. Is that what you want? Ruth? Asked tentatively. To be her mother? Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I don't know what I want yet, Mom. I've had less than 12 hours to process the fact that I have a daughter I never knew existed. I need time to understand my own feelings, my own capabilities, my own desires for the future. She turned to David. But I do know that the current arrangement, where Diana raises Lily as if she's her biological daughter, where I'm expected to play the role of devoted aunt, where everyone pretends that the circumstances of her conception were normal and consensual, that arrangement is built on lies, and I won't be part of it. David sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. So what happens now? Do you want us to tell Diana she can't see Lily anymore? Do you want to take the baby away from the only mother she's ever known? I want, Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of profound exhaustion, to have honest conversations about how to move forward in a way that respects everyone's rights and serves Lily's best interests. But those conversations can't happen while everyone is still trying to protect me from difficult truths or manage my emotional reactions. Ruth stood up, moving toward Maya with her arms outstretched. Maya, darling, I know we made mistakes, but everything we did came from love. We were terrified of losing you, and we thought— Maya stepped back, avoiding her mother's embrace. Mom, I understand that you were scared. I understand that everyone involved thought they were helping, but good intentions don't erase the harm that was done. She moved toward the stairs, then paused and turned back to face her family. I'm going to stay in a hotel tonight. I need space to process everything I've learned, and I need to make some phone calls to lawyers, to Dr. Vasquez, to patient advocacy groups who can help me understand my rights. Maya, please don't leave, Ruth pleaded. We can work through this together as a family. Maya's laugh was hollow. Mom, families work through problems together when everyone has been honest about what the problems are. This situation was created by a series of unilateral decisions made without my knowledge or consent. It's going to require more than family conversation to resolve. David looked up from the couch, his face ravaged by guilt. Maya, I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. If I had known from the beginning what Mom was planning, I would have stopped it. Maya studied her brother's face, seeing genuine remorse, but also recognizing the limits of his moral courage. David, I believe that you didn't intend for this to happen. But intention isn't the only thing that matters. Impact matters too. And the impact of these decisions has been devastating. She paused at the foot of the stairs. I also want you to think about something. You say you would have stopped Mom's plan if you'd known about it from the beginning. But when you learned the truth 3 weeks before Lily was born, what did you do? Did you tell Diana? Did you contact me at Hillcrest? Did you report the medical malpractice to the appropriate authorities? David's silence was answer enough. You chose to become complicit, Maya continued. You chose to protect your own comfort and Diana's pregnancy over my right to know that I was about to become a mother. That wasn't just a failure of intention, David. That was a failure of moral courage. Ruth stepped forward, her voice carrying a note of desperation. Maya, if you pursue legal action against us, it won't just hurt David and me. It will hurt Diana, who genuinely loves Lily. It will hurt Lily herself, who deserves stability. Is your need for justice worth destroying multiple lives? Maya turned to face her mother fully, her expression carrying a mixture of sadness and steel. Mom, that question reveals everything wrong with how this family handles problems. You're asking me to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own violated rights. You're asking me to absorb the consequences of other people's harmful decisions in order to maintain family peace. She moved closer to Ruth, her voice growing softer but more intense. Do you understand what you did to me? You used my body to create a child while I was mentally incapacitated. You involved my brother in that process without his full consent. You manipulated a woman struggling with infertility to carry my genetic child. And then you constructed an elaborate deception to hide all of this from me." Ruth's tears were flowing freely now. "Maya, I was trying to save your life. You were talking about suicide, about how meaningless your existence was. I thought if you had a genetic child, even one raised by someone else, it would give you something to live for." "Then you should have waited until I was competent to make that decision for myself," Maya replied. "You should have trusted me to find my own reasons for living, my own path through grief. Instead, you decided that my agency, my bodily autonomy, my right to make reproductive choices were all secondary to your need to fix my emotional state." Maya walked to the front door, picking up her jacket from the hook. "I'm going to spend tonight processing everything I've learned. Tomorrow, I'm going to start making phone calls to understand my legal options. This weekend, I want to have a conversation with Diana about Lily's immediate care while we figure out long-term arrangements." "Maya," David called after her. "What? Should we tell Diana?" "She's terrified that you're going to try to take Lily away from her." Maya paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Tell Diana that I'm not interested in causing unnecessary pain to anyone, including her. But also, tell her that the current situation, where she raises my biological daughter while I pretend to be just an aunt, isn't sustainable. We need to find a new arrangement that acknowledges the reality of Lily's parentage while serving her best interests." Ruth moved toward the door. "Maya, please don't let lawyers and courts make these decisions for us. We're family. We can work this out. Privately." Maya looked at her mother with an expression of profound sadness. "Mom, we stopped being able to work things out privately when you decided to make life-altering decisions about my body and my future, without my knowledge or consent. Some violations are too significant to be resolved through family dinners and heart-to-heart conversations." She opened the door, then turned back one final time. "I want you both to understand something. I love this family. Despite everything that's happened, despite the profound betrayal I feel, I still love you. But love without respect, without trust, without basic acknowledgement of each other's autonomy, that's not healthy love. That's control disguised as affection." Maya stepped onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting her face like a physical relief. "I'll call tomorrow to arrange a time to pick up some of my belongings. In the meantime, please don't make any decisions about Lily's care or living arrangements without consulting me. I may not have known I was her mother until today, but I am her mother. And I have rights and responsibilities that need to be acknowledged." As Maya walked down the driveway, she could hear Ruth sobbing behind her and David's quiet attempts at comfort. Part of her wanted to turn back, to offer reassurance, to minimize the pain her words had caused. But she recognized that impulse as another manifestation of the same dynamic that had created this crisis in the first place. The expectation that Maya should prioritize everyone else's emotional comfort over her own legitimate needs and rights. She called for a rideshare and waited at the end of the driveway, looking back at the house where she'd grown up. The warm light spilling from the windows should have felt welcoming, but instead it looked like illumination cast over a crime scene. Everything inside that house, every relationship, every assumption about family loyalty and love, had been fundamentally altered by the revelations of this day. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Maya, I'm so sorry. Please know that I never wanted to hurt you. Can we talk tomorrow?" Maya stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Yes, we can talk. But Diana, we need to have honest conversations about what comes next. The situation as it stands isn't sustainable for anyone." As the rideshare pulled up to the curb, Maya realized that she was no longer the fragile psychiatric patient who had returned home that morning. The process of uncovering the truth, of confronting her family's well-intentioned betrayals, had returned something essential to her: her sense of her own agency, her right to make decisions about her own life, her refusal to be managed and protected at the expense of her autonomy. She was still Maya Chen, still someone recovering from profound trauma and loss. But she was also now someone who understood the difference between being cared for and being controlled. And she was determined never to confuse the two again. The car pulled away from the curb, taking Maya toward an uncertain future but away from a past built on lies and good intentions. In the rearview mirror, she could see the house growing smaller, its windows still glowing with warm light that no longer felt like home. Tomorrow, she would begin the complex process of figuring out how to be a mother to a daughter she'd never chosen to conceive, in circumstances she'd never agreed to, within a family structure that would never be the same. But tonight, for the first time in months, Maya Chen belonged entirely to herself. Maya spent her first night away from the family home in a modest hotel room 12 miles from the house where she'd grown up. The space was generic, sterile, exactly what she needed. A place without memories, without emotional history, without the weight of family expectations pressing against her from every corner. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the clothes she'd put on that morning when she'd expected to simply resume her quiet life as a recovering psychiatric patient. That version of herself felt like a stranger now. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, looking for the number Dr. Vasquez had given her for emergencies. Not a psychiatric emergency, but something else. A crisis of identity, of autonomy, of fundamental questions about who she was and what she owed to the people who claimed to love her. The phone rang twice before Dr. Vasquez answered, her voice carrying the cautious professionalism of someone accustomed to after-hours calls from patients in crisis. "Maya, are you all right?" Maya almost laughed at the question. "I don't know how to answer that anymore. I've spent the last 8 hours learning that everything I thought I knew about my recovery, my family, and my life was either incomplete or completely fabricated." "I was afraid this might happen," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "When you asked about the medical records, I knew the conversation with your family would be difficult. Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Maya's voice carried the weight of someone who had run out of patience for protective half-truths. "During my stay at Hillcrest, was I ever legally competent to make major medical decisions? Specifically, was I competent to consent to egg retrieval and to authorize the use of those eggs for reproductive purposes?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. "Maya, that's a complex question with legal implications that go beyond my area of expertise. I'm not asking for legal advice. I'm asking for your professional opinion as the psychiatrist who was responsible for my care. In your medical judgment, was I capable of giving informed consent for reproductive procedures during my time at Hillcrest?" Another pause. "Maya, you had periods of lucidity during your stay, extended periods where you were articulate, rational, and capable of complex reasoning. But you also had periods where your judgment was significantly impaired by your medications and your underlying condition. Which category was I in when I supposedly consented to the egg retrieval?" Dr. Vasquez's sigh was audible through the phone. "You were in a lucid period when you initially discussed fertility preservation. But Maya, the conversations about your eggs being used for other family members, those happened during a much more unstable time. I noted in your file that you were experiencing significant emotional lability, and that your decision-making was being influenced by guilt and desperation. I recommended that any decisions about your genetic material be postponed until your recovery was complete. But they proceeded anyway. And I'm deeply sorry that I wasn't more forceful in my objections." Maya closed, her eyes processing the confirmation of what she'd already suspected. The medical professional responsible for her care had specifically recommended against the very procedures that had resulted in Lily's conception. Her family had chosen to ignore expert medical advice in favor of their own emotional needs. "Dr. Vasquez, I need to schedule an appointment with you as soon as possible, not as a former patient, but as someone who needs professional guidance about how to move forward from here. Of course, I have an opening tomorrow at 10, if that works. For you. Maya ended the call and immediately opened her phone's browser, searching for family law attorneys in her area. She spent the next 2 hours reading reviews, checking credentials, and sending inquiry emails to 3 different firms. Not because she was certain she wanted to pursue legal action, but because she needed to understand her options. By midnight, she had sent a dozen emails to attorneys, to patient advocacy groups, to medical malpractice specialists, to counselors who specialized in family trauma. She wasn't ready to make decisions yet, but she was determined to make informed decisions when the time came. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of babies she couldn't remember conceiving, and family meetings where everyone spoke a language she couldn't understand. The next morning, Maya woke to 17 missed calls from Ruth and 6 text messages from David. She ignored them all and instead called her old supervisor from the design firm where she'd worked before her breakdown. Maya, Karen's voice, was warm with genuine surprise. How are you doing? I heard you were back home. I'm processing a lot right now, Maya said, settling into the hotel room's single chair. Karen, I need to ask you about something. Before my accident, before everything fell apart, did I ever mention wanting children? Did I talk about family planning or fertility concerns? Karen was quiet for a moment. Maya, you know I adored you, but honestly, you were pretty focused on your career back then. You and James talked about maybe having kids someday, but it always seemed like a far-off possibility. You were much more concerned with building your client base and saving money for the house you two were looking at. Maya felt a small piece of validation settle into place. Her pre-breakdown self hadn't been obsessed with having children immediately. The desperation to help Diana have multiple children, the urgency about fertility preservation, those feelings had emerged during her mental health crisis, not before. Karen, I need to ask you something else. Are there any freelance opportunities available? Contract work I could do while I figure out my next steps? Actually, yes. We've got a couple of smaller clients who need brand identity work, and I've been thinking about bringing you back on a project basis. Nothing too demanding, but enough to get you back in the swing of things. Maya felt her chest loosen slightly. Work, purpose, something that belonged entirely to her, unconnected to family drama or medical crises or babies she'd never planned to conceive. I'd like that very much. Can I come in next week to discuss details? After ending the call with Karen, Maya drove to her appointment with Dr. Vasquez. The familiar route to Hillcrest felt different now, not like a journey to treatment, but like a visit to a place where important decisions about her life had been made without her full participation. Dr. Vasquez's office looked the same, but Maya occupied the space differently now, not as a patient seeking help, but as someone demanding accountability for decisions made during her most vulnerable period. Maya, how are you processing everything you learned yesterday? Maya settled into the chair across from Dr. Vasquez, her posture erect and professional. I'm angry, I'm confused, I'm sad, but mostly, I'm determined to understand exactly what happened and to make my own decisions about how to move forward. That's a healthy response. What questions do you have for me? Maya pulled out a notebook where she'd written her questions during the sleepless night. First, I want to understand the timeline of my supposed consent. When exactly did I first mention helping Diana with fertility? When did I sign consent? Forms for egg retrieval? When did I supposedly authorize the use of my eggs for Diana's pregnancy? Dr. Vasquez opened Maya's thick file and flipped through several sections. Your first mention of helping Diana with fertility was during your 3rd week with us. You were in a relatively stable period, and you were processing a lot of guilt about your accident and James's death. You expressed feeling like your life was meaningless and that you wanted to find ways to contribute to something positive. Maya made notes as Dr. Vasquez spoke. And the consent for egg retrieval? That was 6 weeks later. You were having a particularly difficult time. We'd had to adjust your medications because you were experiencing suicidal ideation. During that same week, you became fixated on the idea that preserving your fertility was urgent and essential. You were convinced that if you didn't act immediately, you'd lose your chance to ever contribute to the next generation. Maya's chest tightened. So I was actively suicidal when I signed the consent forms for egg retrieval? Dr. Vasquez nodded reluctantly. Your thinking was significantly impaired by your depression and the medication adjustments. In retrospect, I should have been more assertive about postponing any major medical decisions until you were stabilized. And when did I supposedly authorize the use of my eggs for Diana's pregnancy? Dr. Vasquez flipped to another section of the file. That conversation happened 2 weeks after the egg retrieval. You were in another unstable period, experiencing significant anxiety about Diana's pregnancy and obsessive thoughts about ensuring she could have multiple children. You kept saying that if something happened to her pregnancy, you wanted her to be able to use your eggs to try again. Maya looked up from her notes. But Diana was already pregnant naturally when I supposedly gave this authorization? Yes. Diana was about 12 weeks pregnant when you had that conversation. Which is why I noted in your file that the authorization seemed to be motivated more by anxiety and guilt than by rational planning. Maya set down her pen, the full scope of her family's deception becoming clearer. So my family took an anxiety-driven conversation I had during a mental health crisis and used it as blanket authorization to create a child using my genetic material? I'm afraid that appears to be what happened. And Maya, I want you to know that I documented my concerns about this in your file. I specifically noted that any decisions about your genetic material should be reconsidered once you were stable and discharged from care. Maya felt a surge of anger, but also something like relief. The medical professional responsible for her care had recognized that her supposed consent was problematic. She wasn't imagining the ethical violations. They were documented in her own medical records. Dr. Vasquez, in your professional opinion, what would have been the appropriate way to handle my expressions of wanting to help Diana have children? Dr. Vasquez considered the question carefully. In my opinion, the appropriate response would have been to acknowledge your generous intentions, while explaining that major reproductive decisions needed to be postponed until your recovery was complete. If you still wanted to help Diana after your discharge, we could have facilitated those conversations in a therapeutic setting where you could make fully informed choices. Maya made more notes, building a record of expert opinion that contradicted her family's narrative of honoring her clearly expressed wishes. Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you something else. During my stay at Hillcrest, did my family ever express concerns about my potential reaction to learning about Lily's conception? Dr. Vasquez's expression grew uncomfortable. Maya, your family did express concerns about how you might react to various pieces of information. They were worried that certain revelations might trigger a relapse. What specific revelations were they worried about? They were concerned about you learning that Diana was pregnant. They were worried about you discovering that your eggs had been retrieved. And yes, they were specifically concerned about you learning that your genetic material had been used to conceive Lily. Maya's anger crystallized into something cold and sharp. So they knew that what they were doing was wrong. They knew I would be upset if I found out. And they did it anyway. Maya, I think your family genuinely believed they were acting in your best interests. But yes, they were aware that their decisions would be difficult for you to accept. Maya closed her notebook and looked directly at Dr. Vasquez. I need to understand something. If what my family did to me happened to another patient, if another family used a psychiatric patient's genetic material to conceive a child without proper informed consent, what would be the appropriate response? Dr. Vasquez's discomfort was evident. Maya, that would be a serious ethical violation. It would potentially be grounds for medical malpractice claims, complaints to medical boards, and possibly criminal charges depending on the jurisdiction. And if that same family then concealed the child's existence from the biological mother for months after her recovery, that would compound the ethical violations significantly. It would suggest a pattern of deception that prioritized the family's preferences over the patient's fundamental rights. Maya felt the final piece of validation she needed. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't being ungrateful or difficult. What had been done to her was objectively wrong, according to the medical professional who had been responsible for her care. Dr. Vasquez, I want to continue therapy with you, but I want to be clear about my goals. I'm not here to be convinced that my family's actions were acceptable. I'm here to process the trauma of what happened and to make healthy decisions about my future. I understand. And Maya, I want you to know that I support whatever decisions you make about how to move forward. Your autonomy was violated in a profound way, and you have every right to respond to that violation in whatever way feels appropriate to you. Maya left Dr. Vasquez's office with a clearer understanding of what had happened to her and a growing sense of her own moral authority. She was no longer the confused patient desperate for family approval. She was a woman who had been wronged and was now determining how to respond to that wrong. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. Maya, please call me. Diana is beside herself. We need to talk about what's best for Lily. Maya stared at the message for several minutes before responding. I'll call you tonight. But David, we're not going to talk about what's best for Lily until we've addressed what was done to me. The two issues are connected, but they're not the same. She spent the afternoon in the hotel lobby, making phone calls to the attorneys and advocacy groups she'd contacted the night before. By 5 o'clock, she had scheduled consultations with 2 family law attorneys and 1 medical malpractice specialist. She had also connected with a support group for people who had experienced reproductive coercion and a counselor who specialized in family trauma. Maya was no longer operating from a place of confused desperation. She was building a support network, gathering information, and preparing to make decisions from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. That evening, she called David from the hotel parking lot, sitting in the car she'd rented that morning. Another step toward independence. Maya, thank God. We've been so worried about you. David, I need you to understand something. I'm not missing. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm processing what I learned yesterday and making decisions about my future. There's a difference. David's voice carried exhaustion and guilt in equal measure. Maya, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But we need to talk about Lily. Diana hasn't slept since you left. She's terrified that you're going to try to take Lily away from her. David, I'm not going to make any immediate decisions about Lily's living arrangements. She's bonded with Diana, and I'm not interested in traumatizing a 4-month-old baby. But I am going to insist on honesty about her parentage and on my right to be part of her life as her biological mother. What does that mean practically? Maya had been thinking about this question all day. It means that we need to have honest conversations about custody, about decision-making authority, about how to handle things like medical care and education and financial support. It means that Lily needs to grow up knowing the truth about her conception in age-appropriate ways, and it means that Diana and I need to figure out how to co-parent a child who exists because of decisions that were made without my proper consent. David was quiet for a long moment. Maya, what you're describing sounds like a legal nightmare. Custody battles, court hearings, lawyers arguing about consent and medical ethics. Is that really what you want? Maya's response was immediate and clear. David, what I wanted was to make my own reproductive choices. What I wanted was to have children when I was ready, with a partner I chose, under circumstances I agreed to. What I wanted was to be told the truth about my own life. None of those things happened. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Now I have to make the best of a situation that was created without my consent. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to minimize the consequences of other people's harmful decisions, just to make everyone more comfortable. So what happens now? Now, I spend the next few days gathering information and consulting with professionals. I meet with attorneys to understand my legal rights. I talk to counselors about how to process what happened to me. I figure out how to rebuild my life in a way that acknowledges the reality of Lily's existence while also protecting my own interests. Maya could hear David's breathing on the other end of the line, heavy with the weight of consequences he was only beginning to understand. David, I want you to know that I don't hate you. I don't hate Diana. I don't even hate Mom, though I'm angrier with her than I've ever been with anyone. But I also don't trust any of you anymore. And trust is essential for the kind of co-parenting relationship that Lily deserves. How do we rebuild that trust? Maya had been thinking about this too. We start by being completely honest about everything that happened. We acknowledge the harm that was done without trying to minimize it or justify it. We accept that there will be consequences for the decisions that were made, and we don't ask me to absorb those consequences to protect everyone else's comfort. And then we figure out how to move forward in a way that serves Lily's best interests, while also respecting my rights as her biological mother. But David, that's going to require fundamental changes in how this family operates. No more decisions made without full transparency. No more protecting people from difficult truths. No more sacrificing one person's autonomy for another person's emotional comfort. Maya could hear voices in the background, Ruth and Diana. She assumed, listening to David's side of the conversation. David, I want to see Lily this weekend. Not as her aunt, but as her biological mother. I want to spend time with her, to start building a relationship with her, to begin understanding what it means to be her parent. Maya, I don't think Diana is ready for that. She's been Lily's mother for 4 months. She's breastfeeding. She knows all of Lily's routines. David, stop. Maya's interruption was firm. Diana has been Lily's caregiver for 4 months. That's significant, and I respect that. But she's not Lily's mother. I am. And the longer we pretend otherwise, the more complicated this situation becomes. Maya could hear Diana crying in the background, a sound that made her chest ache with sympathy even as her resolve remained firm. I'm not interested in causing unnecessary pain to Diana or to Lily, but I'm also not going to pretend that I'm just an aunt who happened to donate eggs. I'm Lily's mother, and I have rights and responsibilities that need to be acknowledged. David's voice was barely audible. Maya, what if we can't figure this out? What if the situation is too complicated to resolve in a way that works for everyone? Maya looked out the hotel parking lot, watching families load into cars after dinner. Normal families with normal problems and normal relationships built on normal foundations of trust and respect. Then we'll figure out how to manage an imperfect situation in the least harmful way possible. But David, we can't figure anything out while everyone is still trying to protect me from the truth or manage my reactions. I need to be treated like a competent adult who can handle difficult realities and make her own decisions about her own life. Maya ended the call and sat in the car for several minutes, processing the conversation and preparing for the weekend ahead. She was going to meet her daughter, really meet her, not as a visiting aunt, but as a biological mother trying to understand her role in a child's life. The prospect was both terrifying and necessary. Maya had spent 6 months in psychiatric treatment, learning to manage her depression and grief. She had spent one day learning that she was a mother to a child she'd never known existed. Now she had to figure out how to integrate those two realities into a life that felt authentic and sustainable. She drove back to the hotel, knowing that the most difficult conversations were still ahead of her. Tomorrow, she would meet with her first attorney. Over the weekend, she would spend time with Lily. Next week, she would begin the process of rebuilding her life with the knowledge that she was no longer just Maya Chen, recovering psychiatric patient and freelance designer. She was also Maya Chen, mother to a 4-month-old daughter whose very existence challenged everything she thought. She knew about family, love, and the difference between protection and control. The hotel room still felt like a sanctuary when she returned. Neutral space where she could process these revelations without the weight of family expectations pressing against her from every direction. Maya ordered room service and spent the evening researching child development, reading about attachment theory and the psychological impact of complex family situations on young children. If she was going to be Lily's mother, she was going to be an informed mother. If she was going to navigate the complicated relationship with Diana, she was going to do it with full understanding of what was at stake for everyone involved. Maya fell asleep that night with her notebook open beside her, filled with questions, phone numbers, and the beginnings of a plan for reclaiming her own life while accepting responsibility for the child who existed because of decisions she'd never been competent to make. For the first time since returning home, Maya felt like she was moving towards something rather than simply reacting to revelations. She was still angry, still hurt, still confused about how to move forward. But she was no longer powerless. And for Maya Chen, that made all the difference. 6 months after Maya Chen discovered the nursery in her childhood bedroom, she stood in the kitchen of her own apartment, preparing coffee for a meeting she'd been anticipating for weeks. The space was small but bright, with walls she'd painted, a soft gray that felt both calming and professional. Her design portfolio was spread across the dining table, evidence of the freelance work that had slowly rebuilt both her confidence and her bank account. The phone rang as she was reviewing her presentation materials. "Maya, it's Karen. They want you," her former supervisor said without preamble. "Full contract, 6-month timeline, enough money to set you up for the next year. This is the kind of project that could relaunch your career completely." Maya sank into her desk chair, staring at the portfolio she'd spent months rebuilding. The marketing firm's largest rebranding project, a tech startup needing complete visual identity development. "When do they want to start?" "Next week. Maya, this is going to be demanding work. Are you sure you're prepared?" Maya looked around her apartment, at the photos of Lily on the wall, at the legal documents from her custody arrangement with Diana, at the therapy appointment reminders on her bulletin board. Her life was complicated now in ways she never could have imagined, but it was also fully hers. "I'm ready," she said. After texting Diana about adjusting their schedule, Maya drove to her family's house for her scheduled visit with Lily. The Goward house looked the same from the outside, but everything inside had changed. Ruth had converted the guest room into proper office space for Maya's visits, acknowledging that her daughter needed professional space even when spending time with family. Diana met her in the living room, 10-month-old Lily contentedly taking a bottle in the rocking chair. Lily looked up as Maya entered, her face breaking into the smile that still took Maya's breath away. "Hey, little one," Maya said, settling onto the couch. "I heard you've been asking for me." Diana handed Lily to Maya without hesitation. Smooth, practiced ritual that acknowledged both women's roles in Lily's life. Maya held her daughter, studying her face for the daily changes that seemed to appear constantly. "Maya," Diana said quietly, "I need to tell you something. David and I have been talking about having another child, but we want to be completely transparent with you about our plans." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but also recognized the difference. Diana was telling her about plans, not presenting her with decisions already made. "The fertility. Specialists mentioned that you still have stored genetic material," Diana continued nervously. "We would never consider using it without your explicit consent. But if you ever wanted Lily to have a full biological sibling..." Maya bounced Lily gently, processing Diana's words. "I appreciate you telling me, and I appreciate you acknowledging my right to make decisions about my own genetic material. But I need time to think about it. Of course, your eggs belong to you, not to this family's reproductive planning." The explicit acknowledgement of Maya's autonomy meant more than Diana probably realized. Moments like this helped Maya believe that her family was capable of real change. "Diana, can I ask you something? Do you ever regret how everything happened?" Diana was quiet, gently patting Lily's back as the baby settled into sleep. "I regret the deception. I regret the violation of your rights, but I don't regret Lily's existence. I can't regret loving her." Maya understood. "I don't regret her either. Even though I never chose to conceive her, I can't imagine the world without her now." After leaving for her therapy appointment with Dr. Vasquez, Maya reflected on her progress. "How are you feeling about the work contract?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Excited, nervous, ready?" Maya paused. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine having the energy for demanding work. Now I'm craving the challenge. What's changed? I'm not spending all my emotional energy on confusion and betrayal anymore. I understand what happened. I've established boundaries with my family, and I'm building a relationship with Lily that feels authentic. After therapy, Maya drove to the cemetery where James was buried. She'd avoided this place for over a year, but standing at his grave now, she felt ready. I know you'd be confused by all of this," she said to the headstone. "I have a daughter I never planned to have, with my brother, carried by his wife." She pulled out a photo of Lily. "But James, she's beautiful, and she's helped me understand that love doesn't always happen the way we plan it." Maya spent an hour updating James on her life, her family, her plans for the future. Not because she believed he could hear her, but because speaking aloud helped her process how much had changed. That evening, Maya received a text from David asking if she'd come to Sunday dinner. She agreed, adding that she'd bring Lily back to her apartment afterward. Maya prepared dinner while reviewing the contract details. The project was challenging, exactly the kind of work that would push her skills and rebuild her professional reputation. What excited her most was realizing she was ready for the challenge. 6 months ago, she'd been a psychiatric patient struggling to understand her own reality. Tonight she was a mother, a professional woman preparing for the biggest opportunity of her career. She was still processing trauma, still navigating complex family relationships, still learning how to be Lily's mother under extraordinary circumstances. But she was no longer defined by what had been done to her. She was defining herself through the choices she made, the boundaries she established, the love she cultivated, and the work she created. Maya opened her laptop and began working on design concepts that would launch her new career chapter. Outside her apartment windows, the city settled into evening rhythms, families finishing dinner, children being tucked into bed, people everywhere navigating the complex relationships that defined their lives. Maya Chen was no longer the woman who had returned from Hillcrest 6 months ago, confused and desperate for family approval. She was no longer the woman who had broken down after James's death, unable to imagine a future worth living. She was a mother learning to love a daughter conceived under impossible circumstances. She was a professional reclaiming her career and independence. She was someone who had learned that healing wasn't about returning to who she used to be. Healing was about becoming who she was meant to be. As Maya worked late into the evening, she felt something she hadn't experienced in OV.